100 years, a century of bloodshed. France and England, locked in a brutal dance of death. Kings and nobles fought for glory, but who paid the true price? The 100 Years' War, a vicious conflict that had ravaged Europe for generations, lasted from 1337 to 1453. The war finally concluded, leaving France and England exhausted, scarred, and depleted. France, save for Calais, had almost entirely recaptured its territory from England over the lengthy war. The country saw a horrific cycle of suffering, defeat, and finally victory. France emerged from the ashes, ready to rebuild and reclaim its former glory. But what of the common folk, those who tilled the fields and wove the fabric of society? Their stories are seldom told. They had been filled with a sense of pride and hope, but they also lost loved ones, homes, and livelihoods. The wars meant something even more profound, a return to normalcy, a chance to live their lives free from the constant threat of violence and uncertainty. Would peace truly bring back the life they once knew? Or was the true cost of victory yet to be paid? Grab your curiosity, my friend, as we uncover the truth behind why being the winner of the 100 Years' War might not be as glorious as it seems. Step into the scene and meet Jacques, a simple commoner. Before the war, life on his small farm was simple yet fulfilling. Each harvest brought enough to feed his family, trade at the market, and dream of a brighter future. Then came the war. It had not only claimed lives, but also the livelihoods of many. Imagine your town in ruins, your job gone, and the future looking bleaker than yesterday's bread. That was Jacques' reality. Jacques' fields, trampled underfoot by both French and English forces, no longer yielded the harvest they once did. The crown's coffers, drained by the 100 Years' War, now demanded more from those who had the least. Charles I, known as the Wise, ruled from 1364 to 1380 and inherited a kingdom burdened by war debt. He continued some wartime tax policies, but also sought to reform the financial administration. Years of relentless taxes bled Jacques dry. The tax collector's greedy hand snatched a hefty chunk from every meager harvest, leaving Jacques with barely enough to survive. For Jacques, these taxes weren't just numbers on parchment. They were days of labor, loaves of bread, and the very survival of his family. To make ends meet, Jacques was forced to barter even his most precious tools, the very things he needed to rebuild his life. The Black Death swept across France like a wildfire, stealing Jacques' family. The country's population had shrunk to a third of its previous size. The formerly lively village was completely destroyed, leaving just a shadow of its previous vivacity. Ruder brigands, who were usually soldiers serving no lord and pillaged to survive and become wealthy, added to the chaos and devastation. Trade routes became battlegrounds, and the once bustling market fell silent. Food became scarce, and even basic tools were impossible to find. The war disrupted everything, leaving Jacques struggling to survive. The war may have been fought in the king's name, but they seemed more interested in power struggles than the plight of the people they ruled. The nobility focused on securing their own positions or territories rather than addressing the needs of the populace. The war took its toll not just on Jacques' livelihood, but on his very spirit. The once vibrant farmer was now a shell of his former self, burdened by loss, exhaustion, and a nagging fear for the future. News of victory, with the fall of Bordeaux, the last English stronghold, finally reached Jacques' war-weary ears. Finally, he could breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the constant threat of war and violence was behind them. No longer would he have to fear the thundering hoofs of enemy cavalry or the whistling arrows of English longbowmen. A flicker of hope sparked in his eyes, a chance to rebuild his life and find some semblance of peace. But beneath the surface, a nagging unease gnawed at him. Victory bells tolled, yet the scars of war remained etched deep across the country, into the land, and the hearts of those left behind. The soldiers returned amidst the cheers and rewards of land and honor, their eyes haunted and their spirits fractured by the horrors they'd witnessed. The war took a heavy toll not just on the men, but on the women as well. Many husbands, fathers, and sons didn't return from the battlefields, leaving women to shoulder the burden of running the farms and families alone. This added another layer of hardship to the already difficult struggle for survival. Rebuilding wouldn't be easy. Labor was scarce, with countless young men lost to the war. The land itself seemed to mourn, its fertility sapped by years of neglect. They say we won. But what's victory when you've lost everything? Our fields are barren, our bellies empty, and our hearts filled with loss. Where would we find the strength and the resources to start over? Jacques' village bore the scars of battle etched into the very soil upon which they stood. Farmland lay fallow, once fertile and abundant. It now bore the weight of years of conflict. Crops were trampled by marching armies, and the soil turned to mud. For Jacques and his fellow peasants, they felt the consequences of the war firsthand. The destruction of their livelihoods meant facing the grim reality of famine and inflation. The war's toll on the royal treasury reverberated throughout the kingdom. Increased taxation became a harsh reality, particularly for the commoners. The war had caused widespread destruction of land, property, and infrastructure, which affected the wealth and resources of the nobility. The nobility did face financial strain, having invested heavily in the war effort. However, their resources were often more substantial than those of the peasants. This meant the commoners bore the brunt of the tax increases, struggling to pay land taxes, consumption taxes, and other levies imposed by the nobility and the crown. Every coin collected went towards the country's domestic and foreign debts. The reconstruction effort, and addressing the economic challenges that followed the conflict. These demands seemed to grow with each passing year, leaving the French people with barely enough to survive, further exacerbating their economic struggles. Before the war, Jacques' village, full of skilled weavers, had relied on a steady supply of English wool. They crafted beautiful tapestries, the envy of the village market. The English Channel, a narrow stretch of water separating England and France, was like a bustling highway for trade between northern Europe and the Mediterranean. But the fighting had choked off trade routes, and the once vibrant wool trade had vanished. English merchants no longer arrived with their precious cargo. The war had made travel dangerous, and the ports were a mess. Social unrest ensued as returning soldiers faced difficulties reintegrating into society, leading to increased tensions and occasional violence. Banditry flourished, roving bands of mercenaries, left unemployed by the conflict, preyed on those they could. Traveling the roads, or venturing far from the village, became fraught with danger. He remembered the days of bustling markets filled with merchants from near and far, the laughter of customers, the clinking of coins, the thrill of a good bargain. It all seemed like a distant dream. Jacques wondered if he'd ever make Gascon wine again. But amidst the chaos, Jacques remained steadfast in his resolve. Inspired by tales of valor and sacrifice, he found courage in the face of adversity, determined to carve out a brighter future for himself and his loved ones. They had survived the 100 Years' War, and they were confident that they could overcome any obstacle that lay ahead. With unwavering determination, commoners like Jacques turned their attention to the land, tilling the soil and sowing the seeds of hope amidst the ashes of destruction. The fertile fields and verdant meadows, once scarred by the footprints of war, now beckoned to be cultivated anew. With sleeves rolled up and hearts heavy with resolve, they set to work. Side by side, they labored tirelessly, their hands and backs bent to the task of restoration. Jacques, too, set to work. Jacques had tended to his small farm, cultivating grapes and raising livestock. With the resumption of trade and commerce, Jacques saw a chance to improve his fortunes. The wine he produced from his vineyard was renowned throughout the region. The disruptions to agriculture and trade weakened the feudal bonds between lords and their vassals. Years of neglect and hardship left many lords struggling to maintain their estates, to financial strain from the conflict's cost and loss of lands, diminishing their economic power and military influence. Amid societal upheaval, peasants like Jacques, burdened with unfair taxes and neglected by their lords, began to question their loyalty. The traditional oath of service to the landlord felt less like a duty and more like an oppressive burden. Jacques and his commoner friends increasingly asserted their rights and demanded better treatment from both the nobility and the crown. This included calls for fairer taxation, improved working conditions, and protection from exploitation by their feudal lords. Meanwhile, King Charles VII saw an opportunity in the chaos. The war had significantly weakened the nobility, diminishing their power and influence. He shrewdly seized this chance to consolidate power and establish himself as the sole authority in the kingdom. Royal officials, loyal to the crown, fanned out across the land. Their purpose was to replace the fragmented rule of the nobles with a centralized bureaucracy. Royal courts, like the newly established parliaments, rose in prominence, their authority superseding the local feudal courts. This marked a significant shift in power, with the French monarch emerging stronger and the feudal system on the decline. Slowly but surely, signs of revival emerged. Prices, though still volatile, began a gradual stabilization, offering a glimmer of hope for a war-weary populace. Royal officials, under the direction of King Charles VII, established new tax offices to collect revenues more efficiently. This newfound financial stability finally allowed the kingdom to cautiously build a standing army in the aftermath of the war, a necessary precaution against renewed English aggression. The reopening of trade routes, though limited by tariffs and lingering political tensions, brought a much-needed boost to the French economy in the mid-1460s and late 1400s. Ports like Marseille, Bordeaux, and Caen bustled once more, connecting France to other European markets. This economic improvement offered some relief to commoners like Jacques. His renowned wine could finally find buyers beyond his war-torn village. The war's devastation had created a power vacuum, and the once dominant feudal nobility found their influence waning. This, in turn, allowed merchants and commoners to assert themselves more prominently, both economically and politically. While labor shortages did give peasants some leverage to negotiate better wages, the process was slow and uneven across different regions. The monarchy, recognizing the shift in power, sought the support of these newly empowered commoners and urban merchants, granting them certain privileges in exchange for loyalty. The road to recovery was long and arduous. The war had caused immense damage to infrastructure, agriculture, and the overall population. Rebuilding would be a multi-generational endeavor. Pockets of social unrest still flared, to economic hardship and lingering resentment towards the nobility. The consolidation of royal power also faced resistance from some nobles unwilling to relinquish their traditional control. Yet, as trade routes were restored and commerce began to flourish, commoners played a vital role. They were the merchants plying their wares along the slowly repaired roads, the laborers rebuilding bridges and pathways that connected distant lands. They were the backbone of the economy, the unsung heroes of a nation determined to rise from the ashes. Life would never be the same for Jacques and his fellow villagers. The war may have left scars that would never fully heal, but his story is still unfolding amidst the ebb and flow of history. But amidst the rubble, new opportunities arose. The bonds forged in hardship proved stronger than steel, and as he looked to the horizon, he knew that the shadows of war would eventually give way to the light of a new dawn. Jacques, a name that could belong to any commoner of the time, becomes our window into this turbulent era. In reflecting on Jacques' story and the aftermath of the 100 Years' War, it becomes evident that being the winner of such a prolonged and devastating conflict came at a considerable cost. While France may have emerged victorious, retaining its territorial integrity and political standing, the realities faced by ordinary French people like Jacques compel us to look beyond the celebratory pronouncements of victory. Moreover, the political transition that followed the war brought its own challenges. With the decline of feudalism and the rise of centralized power, Jacques found himself navigating a changing social landscape where old certainties no longer held true. It's not exactly a recipe for stability when you're just trying to rebuild your life. The war wasn't just fought by sword and shield, but also by coin and decree. The true cost, however, was paid by everyday people like Jacques. Their struggles raise a crucial question. Maybe this victory isn't about a king. Maybe it's about the people reclaiming their power, their voice, and their future. King Charles VII may have won the war, but can he win the peace without addressing the cries of his own people? So, the next time you hear about a great victory, remember Jacques. Remember the human cost. The Hundred Years' War is a brutal reminder that war might win you land, but it leaves everyone else picking up the pieces. Did this seemingly endless conflict pave the way for progress? Or was it just a brutal waste of life and resources? The Hundred Years' War leaves us with a complex legacy. Here, with Jacques as our guide, we explored the human side of history, which is often lost in dates and battle names. His story reminds us, they say we won, but victory feels like defeat when all you've known is lost. The Hundred Years' War stands as a stark reminder of the high cost of conflict, urging us to seek solutions through dialogue and diplomacy. As we remember the past, let us strive for a future where peace prevails, where cooperation triumphs over conflict, and where the spirit of resilience continues to illuminate the path forward. Understanding the complexities of this period not only enriches our knowledge of the past, but also provides valuable insights into the challenges we face in the present day. By continuing to learn and engage with history, we honor the resilience of those who came before us and gain a deeper appreciation for the forces that shape our world. If you found Jacques' story compelling or thought-provoking, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing this video. Your engagement helps spread awareness of the human side of history and encourages dialogue about the lasting effects of conflict on society. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the aftermath of the Hundred Years' War.